Argentinian beef is famously some of the highest quality beef available in the world today. But if you live outside South America, you've probably never tasted it. It's too expensive to import into our countries. Not because the beef is out of the price range of most normal people, the beef is quite affordable. But our farmers have lobbied the government to put a hefty import tax, or tariff, on importing goods from Argentina. If foreign food is too expensive, supermarkets can't stock them, and consumers will be funneled towards buying from local farmers instead, increasing their profits. The farmers are advocating for protectionism. They believe their industry is worth protecting and deserves special treatment from foreign competition. The motive is entirely self-interested. And not just farmers do this. Brewers, car manufacturers, pharmacists, most industries lobby the government to put taxes on foreign goods to give them the upper hand in the marketplace. Obviously, having more expensive food and less choice is bad for regular people, so politicians have to spin these taxes on imports to be more palatable to voters. They say, we shouldn't be reliant on foreign countries to feed us, we should be able to feed ourselves. We can make things here and keep the wealth in the country to protect jobs and livelihoods. And I see the logic, but protectionism fails at its job pretty much every time it gets tried. Cast your mind back to 2022. The pandemic was coming to an end. Consumers were returning to shops, causing shortages and price rises. At the same time, Abbott Labs, America's largest baby formula manufacturer, had to temporarily shut down production due to bacterial contamination. Parents became unable to feed their children as stocks dwindled and prices skyrocketed. Unfortunately, because American politicians want America to be self-sufficient, foreign baby formula is subject to high tariffs and is therefore too expensive to be worth the hassle of importing. Eventually, the president had to intervene and lowered import restrictions and to let people buy formula from Spain. But when the crisis was over, the tariffs went back up, laying the foundations for the exact same crisis happening again in the future. So tariffs did not make America self-sufficient. It made it weaker and reliant on Spain to help it through a crisis. Now, in a world where trade roams free, baby formula would have been coming in from all over the world, and if the US manufacturer had to shut down, there would be no disruption in supply, prices would not have risen, and infants would not have had to go without food. True security is not found in literally putting all of your eggs in one basket, but having numerous sources of goods so that there are still enough options if one were to fail. If you want an example of what an entirely self-sufficient food economy would look like, just look at Britain in World War II. The German blockade of British shipping routes led to food shortages and the introduction of rationing in the UK. Britain was able to survive entirely on domestic food production, but it was a lot of bland, starchy foods like potatoes, causing the population to have chronic flatulence and take massive shits. Everyone had to follow a strict diet. They were assigned what food they could and couldn't eat, and they had to grow vegetables in their garden. Domestic alternatives like whale meat proved unpopular. Why would we want to do that to ourselves in peacetime? What about protecting industry from foreign competition? India, for example, is a big country with 1 billion people who will gladly work for lower wages than workers in the West. Japan spends billions of yen each year to give its car industry an upper hand on the international marketplace. Do tariffs level the playing field against unfair practices? When President George Bush introduced tariffs on steel in 2002, it just gave the steel industry an excuse to raise their prices and cut costs now that they no longer had any competition. With worse and more expensive steel, car makers just raised the price of their cars to afford to buy steel from abroad. Foreign car makers, on the other hand, did not have to deal with any of this and kept their cars the same price. The tariffs made US industry less competitive, leading to worse steel and more expensive cars. Nice one, George. Personally, I don't care if my car is British or Japanese, I only want what's best and cheapest. Cars do not have a nationality or a soul. Okay, maybe some of them do, but if Japanese people don't like being taxed so that I can have a cheaper car, that's their problem. I understand that not everyone is convinced by that argument, so let's instead look at a small country like New Zealand. In the 1970s, the country was fiercely anti-trade, so strict that even foreign newspapers and magazines were subject to tariffs. Then in 1984, the Prime Minister infamously got very drunk and called an election on live TV,
My opponent's much time to run up to
which he proceeded to lose in a landslide to David Lange. The Lange government went on a blitz against subsidies and tariffs, particularly on the agricultural industry. Suddenly, New Zealanders could buy food from Australia, China and the USA, much bigger countries with more land and more people. That was tough on some farmers. About 1% of farms that relied on government subsidies, went bankrupt. But the rest of the industry, and New Zealand at large, prospered greatly. Lower tariffs meant they could buy machinery from Australia and the United States. Their farms got more efficient, cows cost less to feed, they produced more meat and dairy, and output increased 400% in just 15 years, leading to higher profit margins for farmers. Today, New Zealand is still very much an agricultural economy. 80% of their exports are agricultural products, and their farming sector still employs 1 in 14 Kiwis. Farmers who once hated David Lange now revere him as a saviour of the country's farming heritage. Rather than destroying the industry, free trade revitalised it. Let's not kid ourselves though. Some industries will be unable to compete. Some companies will go under, and that's tough on its workers, even if the greater population benefits with cheaper and better goods. Like any policy, there are winners and losers. But there are still ways to protect local industries in the face of foreign competition, and in a way that doesn't lead to higher prices for consumers or a lower standard of living. Government contracts. National infrastructure decays over time, and will always need to be replaced eventually. We can enshrine into law that all government projects must be made by domestic manufacturers. That way, local industry will always have a steady income stream even if their other customers start buying products from abroad. School lunches must always be made with food grown domestically. The Navy must always use ships constructed in local shipyards. And bridges must always be built using steel from steelworks in our cities. I think this is a fair compromise. I've talked a lot about the benefits of free trade, but what's the best argument against free trade? The world powers of the 19th century threw up high tariffs, much higher than they are today, and it was a period of great industrialization, human development, and the opening chapter of the United States as a global superpower. Many people have used it to argue high tariffs lead to national economic greatness, or that tariffs are necessary for a developing country to become wealthy. Maybe that was the case in the past, but Africa is the least economically developed continent in the world, and yet every country in Africa is working on one giant free trade area that eliminates 90% of tariffs. Immediately after the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, nations like Poland, Romania, Bulgaria and the Baltics rushed to join the European Union as soon as possible, to benefit from that bloc's policy of complete free trade between members. It's clearly a policy that developing nations think is in their interest to pursue. Either way, it remains a fact that in the modern, developed world, free trade between developed countries is an overwhelmingly good thing on balance. Better products, a lower cost of living, food security, increased efficiency. But the best argument for free trade isn't even about money or economics. When two countries trade with each other so much that they become interdependent, they rarely need to go to war. Borders that are frequented by trade rarely need to be patrolled by soldiers.